Hello and welcome to today's Claimversation. My name is Ashley Sneller and today I'm joined by the one and only Jes Vargas. Jes, can you give a quick introduction into who you are and why you care so much about claims?
Sure. I'm Jes Vargas. I'm the Director of Product and Solutions at Benekiva. I actually started my career as a claims processor, so I've lived the reality of working in legacy systems and navigating really manual, fragmented processes. So I also moved into digital transformation roles and I worked full life cycle changes. So I worked from new business all the way through claims, including platform conversions and process redesign. So now at Benekiva, I get to work closely with carriers and understand how they're operating today and be a part of building solutions that address those challenges. So I'm really fortunate I get to do that for a living. So for me, it's not theoretical. I get to see from the inside as an operator that I've worked from the transformational side, and I get to kind of help shape what better can look like. So I get to build and kind of shape what I care so much about. I get to do something really cool and have a lot of impact. So I'm very passionate about the space.
I love that. And we're going to talk more about that here in just a minute. So, for context, Claimversations are meant to be conversations about how people, processes, and technology all come together to make claims what they need to be, and how we need to use different parts of that Venn diagram, how we need to improve those to offer the best claim experience possible. Today, you guys are in for a treat because, as Jess mentioned, she's worked with dozens of carriers and has seen patterns from working with different carriers, even common things that can go well and common ways to make things go well, but also common pitfalls that carriers fall into on the claims side. And so today we're going to talk through kind of a summary of a lot of those patterns so that you guys can hear just some ideas of how can we make our claims processes even better. Before we dig into the what of the what are the different pitfalls, I want to take a step back and talk about the why. So, Jess, when we're talking about things like getting claims right or getting claims transformations right, why does that matter to a carrier? What kinds of value or benefits can they see from that?
So I think the first thing that we have to determine or define really is what a claims transformation is and is not, because people seem to think that by just putting themselves onto a new system, then that's claims transformation, right? That's not an accurate statement. So they need to actually be looking at their processes, right? Not just digitizing what they have today and replicating what they have today. So if you're just taking what you have today and layering a digital tool on top of it, you're just making a broken process run in a more modern way or a more modern facelift, right? So it's about taking all of those and evaluating and saying, okay, well, what could be running better? Where could we be maybe aligning more to a best practice, something like that? Where could we be streamlining to reduce cycle time or something like that, because all of those things have inherently have dollar value, right? Have value to reducing cycle time. You can actually reduce the amount of admin work that your team's doing, and so that they can spend more time with the beneficiaries and the claimants. All of these things have value, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the time when we actually are working with customers, they kind of expect us to come in and just be the silver bullet. They say, oh, well, I can just implement your system and we're going to get a cycle time is going to be cut to 40%, right? Well, no, if you just come in and put our platform over what you have today and just expect that to happen with no change to your process, that's not what's going to happen, right? You need to think about how your flow works today and where we can try to streamline, and we work with our customers, right, to make that happen. But you have to re-envision, and then I think that's the beauty of doing an implementation with a customer or with a vendor like us, right, is that you can take that time to do that work and really re-envision your process. I don't think anybody gets as excited about it as maybe I do, but I think that the kind of like, it's the art of the possible kind of thing, that maybe it's only process junkies that get that excited about it, but that's where I think that really the dollars and stuff like that start adding up. And maybe initial the initial investment can appear to be a little bit more, right? But long term, your investment just by digitizing and then just keeping your process long and arduous is going to be so much larger, right? So it's trying to evaluate and find that balance.
Definitely. And for everyone involved. I mean, obviously leadership is happy to see dollars saved, but claims examiners are happy to not have to be in 9 systems and click
Yep.
317 times to process a claim, or a
Mhm.
beneficiary is really happy to be able to just access it when they need it and not have to have all the back and forth. Like, it helps everyone in the chain when done right.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that's a good lead into kind of pitfall number 1. So today we have a list of about 7 patterns. I'm going to say 7 plus because Jess has some bonus round ones at the end, but pitfalls that are pretty common to see carriers fall into in claims processing. You just touched on number 1. So number 1 being when you approach an implementation just as installing a new system. So that's the pitfall. What does it look like when it's done right? And how do you know when you've hit that mark?
So
Loaded
I
question.
think, yeah, that is a loaded question. I think that it's so, like I said before, it shows up when you show up the intention in upfront, right? So when you do the work at the beginning and you really think about the process up front, it can feel slow and it can feel expensive up front. And you get the reduction of time and effort long term for the payoff, right? And lower costs per claim, faster cycle times, less rework, ability to scale without adding additional headcount. There's like infinite payoff basically at that point, but I think that you do get a lot more flexibility, right? Long term too. I think it's you do think that, or you think that it's going to be just this initially you get this wonderful like digital experience or something like that, but you get more than just the digital. There's it's larger than that, right? And I think we do talk a little bit later, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of individual workflows, which I
Yeah.
feel very passionate about, so I don't want to ruin that. But I think there's definitely it's not just about like the actual system itself, it's about these individual moments
Yeah.
that you can really have impact in. um but I think that I just think that this, just using the time to treat the implementation process as a
Yeah.
complete redesign moment and working with the teams that way
Yeah.
is the biggest bang for your buck.
That's huge. And I mean,
Mhm.
you even said this the last time you're on for a Claimversation of you should be using it as a chance to ask why. Like, why
Yeah,
are we doing this? Not just,
be
I'm not just
really annoying.
ask it
Be
over and over
very annoying. Yeah,
until you can get to the root of why it matters and how to make it what it's supposed to be and not just what it's
yeah,
always been.
right. Yep,
Huge.
exactly.
Well, that's kind of a perfect lead into pitfall number 2.
Mhm.
This one I'm just gonna call change management because it is
Mhm.
a big, messy topic. But
Yeah.
why is change management so hard?
Well, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So this is where the transformation can succeed or loudly fail, right? Um, so most often, right, it shows up as resistance from an operations team. That's where we most often see it, at least. A lot of times it can either be from the operations team or from the technology team. Most often we see that from the technology team even prior to the actual, like, even contract signing. There will be that. Um, Not just because they're being like wanting to be difficult. Like, that's not what we're trying to say here. They're being asked to change how they work without understanding why they're being asked to change how they work, right? They're not being communicated to effectively. And, it may just be because, their leader was communicated to by their leader, was communicated to by their leader, and there's something wrong in that translation chain. And it's not coming through right. And they're not understanding the why of it, right? So they automatically just default to the fear of the automation is going to replace me, right? Because we've all been dealing with this for like the last, what, 5-10 years, because a lot of these transformation projects have been all about automation, especially in recent years, AI, right?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks automation and AI is going to replace me. It's going to replace me. Realistically, it's not going to replace you. It is going to enhance what you do today. And it's going to take away some of those admin repetitive things that you shouldn't be spending time on, right? But everyone defaults to it's going to replace me today, right? So when leadership announces a new system, they don't connect what it means to the day to day, what it's actually going to do to make that person's job easier. So it starts to feel like that person is having a change done to them instead of for them or with them, right? So where we've seen huge benefits, and this is at Benekiva, at my prior companies, is where we've actually brought in operations SMEs to be the ones who are actually engaged in the project, whether that's as business analysts or subject matter experts or testers even, to be involved early, right? So they've been actually engaged in the system as actually designing part of the process too. That tends to be really helpful, so they can actually see the process and have input, right? So then when they actually go and get into the system and they're in production, so when they're actually rolling out, they can go to their coworkers and say, hey, this really cool thing's going on, blah blah blah, and they have clout with their team. So that goes a long way, to influence, and say, hey, this is not going to be this big scary thing, and they can communicate with their groups. So it definitely makes a big impact, for quicker adoption, um, just to have them involved from the start. And I'm not saying from the start of your testing or from the start of your build or something like that. I'm saying from the start of your sales process with a vendor. That is really important to be involved in, even seeing some of the demos and things like that, because you're going to be part of this process. Like, that is important to have them engaged. As if you're considering, let's say, 2 platforms, start bringing some of your operational SMEs in, because they're going to be the ones actually using this, not you. Not you
Right.
as a CIO, not you as a claims director. Like, you're not going to be using this every day. They are. This is the important stuff for them that they should be engaging in. So
That's huge. And then change isn't happening to them, it's happening
yeah.
with them.
Yes.
And they
It
have
makes
feedback
a
to make
big
it actually
difference. Yeah. It completely changes the temperature of an implementation. I mean, I've seen it with when there's no engagement, and I've seen it when there's tons of engagement. It's a completely different room to be in. Completely
Yeah.
different.
That's
Makes a
huge.
big difference. Yeah.
So involve early and in every step.
Oh yeah. Yep. I mean, there's decision-making things that people are not a part of, right? We're not saying they need to be involved in contracting or stuff, right? But there's places where they should be part of the process. And, it's just, it just makes sense, right? When you think about it, it makes sense.
Absolutely. I think so. That pitfall seems to lead very well into the next one. So
Mhm.
pitfall number 3 that we've seen a lot is just when carriers don't trust their system. So let's say, I need to calculate interest on a payout, and
Mhm.
the system's done it, but I'm also just going to go do it on my spreadsheet on the side, or I have this correspondence, but I'm just going to go ahead and write it myself instead, even though it automatically created. Why
Mhm.
why does this happen?
It is in the DNA of a claims examiner not to trust anything that's in front of them,
Yeah.
because every single one of them has trusted something in front of them once, and it has backfired. Whether
Yeah.
it has caused an overpayment and they've had somebody come to their desk and that has caused a problem and maybe gotten them put on an action plan or something, or gotten them in trouble, or possible fraud issue. There's a number of different things, right? So there's claims is very high stakes, right? And I don't know about other teams, but personally, when I was in training, um, we got told a lot of horror stories, right? Of different possible, like when there were fraud issues and things like that. So we were told from the beginning, you need to be very careful of what you're sending out the door, right? So we kind of went into it just like, okay, we need to be very careful about what we're doing, right? Because you're sending hundreds of thousands of dollars out the door, especially as a level 1 examiner, and then later millions of dollars out the door. You have to be very cognizant of what you're doing. So of course you're going to check every single thing you do, right? Because if you have a green screen system in front of you that is notorious for calculating return of premium wrong, you're going to double check that.
Yep.
Because your neighbor told you that that calculates that wrong, you're going to always check that, right? So it's one of those things that we hear it a lot, right? And we design a system that we want you to not have to check this all the time. But we know that it is in the DNA of the claims examiner to want to check everything all of the time, right? It's the natural order of things when we're talking about claims. But I think that if people don't trust the system, that it's a signal, it's not a people problem, it's a design problem. So, and what I mean by that is design of process and design of, it can be design of system too, depending on what you're dealing with, but design of process mainly, right? And I think that the carriers that kind of eventually get past the problem, they don't just tell people to trust the system and just move on, whatever, but they prove it, they fix things, they give them the reason to believe in them and to trust the system. They make the changes to make that system actually calculate the return of premium correctly. And, don't just say, you're just stuck with this, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of cases where you're kind of stuck with the mainframe system because nobody knows COBOL and they can't go and fix it. But, hopefully as we kind of go forward and are developing these platforms that we are to try to kind of lay over these mainframe systems, that we can fix that and try to give people a little bit more relief that they're not having to do manual calculations over and over again. But, it's not something, trust can't be mandated. It has to be earned, right?
Yeah.
And, once it's there and the automation can actually deliver, we're going to go a long way. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But it's going to be very hard to earn. Claims examiners are very, very tough.
And rightfully so.
Yeah.
It seems like it goes really well with the change management piece, though, of if your team gets to be there every step of the way and help design it, they'll have faith in it when the time comes to use it.
Because they call out those things and they say, hey, this is this one point. We always have problems with this one thing. So if we know, hey, when we run a quote at this one point, there's always an issue with this calculation, right? Okay, well, then we know we can run a formula or, something in the system. We can program a calculation to happen and run a calculation here for a return of premium to maybe do a check, right? We can do something. Those are the things that we need to know. And maybe, your head of, tech or something like that isn't going to know that. Your operations team is going to know that.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Having the right people in the room goes a long way.
It really does.
Yep.
So kind of next one is similar. This is all about how we're designing systems, right? So pitfall number 4 that you had was invisible code of sometimes carriers can configure and configure and configure and configure until they're trapped in this fortress of code. How does that happen? How does that impact them?
Okay, so if anybody doesn't understand what invisible code is, okay, so it's not custom, code, but it's basically like configuration that acts like code, right? So it's what we see when we have very flexible platforms, right, that offer a lot of configuration, right? Which is great. We love flexibility. We love the configurations, but sometimes when we have carriers that are layering a lot of rules and a lot of logic and a lot of exceptions and custom workflows and custom statuses, they're basically recreating their old systems and their old processes through configuration. They're then making it much more difficult to take upgrades, take any other fixes or anything like that in the system, right? So by doing that, then we suddenly have issues with having to do much more robust testing, right? Anytime they have to take an upgrade, you have to do like a full implementation worth of testing because they have all of these configurations that nobody else has, right? So there's so much more out there. So yes, you didn't customize, you didn't have custom code, but you basically have a custom system, right? So we get that not every carrier is the same, right? Functions the same way. There's a lot of regulatory considerations, there's product differences, there's a lot of different nuances, right? But there's a lot of industry best practices that are widely accepted in some way or another. Yes, there may be a dollar value difference in what's considered an express claim with carrier A versus carrier B, but there's still a concept of express claims, right? So there's still, it's still the same, right? It's just the difference in the dollar, and we would still configure dollar A versus dollar B. And I think that when I go into a carrier and I talk to them about like these best practices and I start bringing some of these things up, they start then asking me, well, what are the other carriers doing? So that they can start asking these things. And that is like my favorite thing when I start going into these carriers and they start asking me these questions, because I'm like, oh, they actually want to improve things and they want to make their process more like everyone else because they've realized, hey, we're doing things way different than everyone else is doing. So let's see where we can maybe start doing best practices and start, adhering to what others are doing. When carriers over-index or, and think that they're so different, they end up configuring like around processes that could be really simple and standardized. And, if they just kind of would listen and say, okay, well, you're doing this, but you could just be doing this a little bit differently and you would get the same result, right? So it's about I feel like knowing how to get from point A to point B by not just taking a little bit of a different route. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
It
I think
almost seems like
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it almost seems like the antidote is just being willing to ask questions of what does everybody else do, and then having an open mind of, okay, what again, going back to the asking why do I do this? Should it be more like this so I can get from A to B faster?
Yeah, and also, I mean, being willing to hear, hey, this is if I was going to do if I go into a carrier and I say, what do you currently do? And they say, this is what I do, step A to step 8, right? Whatever. Then I say, okay, but you could do this, go over here, and then this. And it would do the same thing, but it wouldn't require any additional configuration.
Yeah.
And you say, no, I can't. I need to still do all of these things for no other reason besides this is just how I do it and this is how I always do it.
Yeah.
There needs to be a better reason besides this is just how we do it.
Yeah.
If your compliance team says it, great. If you are refusing to go to your compliance team and talk to them about it because you just say that they're going to say no, your compliance team is willing to have the conversations. A lot of people just don't want to talk to them.
Yeah.
I
don't think people think about that very often.
No, they don't. No, they don't. People just say, oh no, they're not going to do this. Well, did you ask though? Just let's go talk about it, because if we, just explain like, hey, we're just trying to figure out what makes most sense. They're also more than reasonable. Let's have the conversation.
Yep.
If they say no, they say no.
Yep. But then you know why.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you weren't afraid to ask the question.
Yep.
So this leads in well. So pitfall number 5 is the 80-20 trap, which we just recently released a report where we had the privilege of interviewing dozens of claims examiners. And it's crazy how much the 80-20 trap is felt of through an implementation. We got it like 60 to 80% right, but now we're still in the old system for the 20% and we're not using it as often. So it's harder because we're not as familiar with it and we just feel trapped.
Yeah.
How do carriers fall into this pitfall? And are there any things that help ease this pitfall?
Well, I think one of the first things I see that people typically, one of the first reasons I see them fall into it is because they try to solve for the 20% way too early.
Mm.
So they get stuck not able to process the 20 because they get stuck in too early solving it in the beginning. And then they get stuck basically where they can't process 40% instead of the 20%. You follow me? So
Yep.
there's an issue with more. So our recommendation is typically, obviously, you want to try to, you're not going to solve 100% of the scenarios up front, right? We know this. Not all edge cases, not every exception, not every one if. We try to do the best we can, even on our side, to try to accommodate almost every scenario we can think of. But there's always going to be something that falls between the cracks, right? In every implementation, there's always something that falls between the cracks. And especially something that, even if we accommodate it on our side, it may be something that is accommodated differently at the carrier that we now need to figure out a different solution for, right? So the reality is that those requirements for this 20%, they're not actually requirements, they're habits.
Yeah.
So they're not truly required processes. And they're things that have just been done a certain way, like I was kind of saying before, and they get carried forward. They've never been asked or challenged. Again, we always understand there are instances where things cannot be challenged. Compliance is saying this cannot change. Totally fine. But there's always an opportunity to be pressure tested, right? We ask the question, we say, is this truly a regulatory or compliance need? Or is this just how it's historically been handled? So we ask that during requirement session. And if it's been, we wait for the answer. And if they say it's historically how we've been handled, we say, can we talk to compliance about it then and see if it's a possible change, especially if it's something that we've already worked with another carrier on and there's a different solution that we already employ, right? Mm-hmm. If we're already doing something else and already have a best practices for it, let's see if we can kind of have it solved a different way, right? I think that the whole goal is that we're trying to kind of move everybody towards the best practices so that we can work at scale, right? So that everybody is working towards this goal. And so we can try to get everybody to the similar metrics and things like that. And we're seeing consistency kind of across the industry, right? But we're not trying to customize by default, right?
Yeah.
And so we recommend, obviously, design for the 80%, simple, efficient, and then handle the edge cases from there. And usually, like we during requirements, we take those down, make a list of them, right? We typically will, during solutioning and during my SRDs, I'll put what we typically do and how we typically handle those in the solution document. And I'll walk through it. And if there's something that deviates from what they would expect or how they want to go, then we kind of mark it and we say, okay, well, this is something we got to figure out a solution for because they don't want this way, something. But at the end of the day, if you build your entire process around the exceptions are the entire process.
Yeah.
And then it ends up being, you can only process 60% of your claims, and that's not what you're trying to go for, right? Especially because it doesn't end up being 80% and then 20%. It ends up being you can process 95% of your claims and then 5% are off, right?
Yeah.
When it's all said and done. I know we call it 80-20, but you get what I mean.
Yep. No, it was another interview that we had where the person basically was like, there's no reason it has to be 80. Like, there's really, if you're asking why, if you're cutting out the things that don't make sense, if you're adhering to best practices, it probably should only be 5 or less percent.
Yeah.
And you should penalize the 95% for the 5%.
You'd be shocked the amount of people that had never even heard of express claims until I walked into their offices and they're like, oh, I'm like, and they're like, we need to consider that, that would clear out our backlog. And I'm like, yes, it would, because that's a substantial amount of volumes, especially because you have a lot of term policies and, low dollar term policies. And then that significantly reduces their volumes. And then that makes their percentage go down even, of their complex claims even lower, right? Because then they have more time.
Yep.
It's little things like that.
But they matter. They really add up, and that's why it's important to address and get to the bottom of the pitfall and
Always
figure stuff
ask
out.
why. Why?
That seems to be the theme on all of these.
Yes, it is. At least on mine. It's always going to be the theme on mine.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, next one that you had, pitfall number 6. You had over-specialization. I'm curious, what does this mean to you, and why is it a pitfall for claims teams?
This is something I feel like I talk about constantly. I don't know why it always ends up coming up, but it's this statistic that sticks with me, I feel like, is that I heard it somewhere in the last couple years about essentially the turnover of the operations, especially in claims, the turnover for retirement. Basically, it's supposed to be 50% by 2030, right? That's a substantial amount of the staff. And so you're losing a lot of institutional knowledge. So, and I don't think that the volume and like the impact of that is really super clear. So I want to illustrate that every customer that I've gone to in the past, let's say year and a half, when I go to them and I say, I need to make sure that I get your business rules documented so that we can make sure that they get implemented on the system. Can I get your business rules documented? And they point to a person.
Oh, wow.
And they say they have them. And I say, okay, can I have the, document? They go, no, they're in my head. And I say, okay, well, I'm going to need you to download them off your head. And I need you to put them into a Excel spreadsheet or something for me, because I can't exactly like pull them out of you,
Yeah.
So we're talking about people who have been doing this for 40, 50 years, right? Who have all of this knowledge in their head. Sometimes they're in binders. Very rarely they're in binders, especially post-COVID. I feel like a lot of people don't have the binders anymore. And so not only are we dealing with super specialized claims knowledge, we're dealing with super specialized systems knowledge, right? Now, fortunately, we're in a space where now people are kind of transforming their operational areas. So like a lot of past systems have been upgraded in the last 10 years. So we're getting a little bit more modern there. Some people still have more mainframe systems, but most of them are kind of starting to get converted and moved out, or dying off and rolling out, but there still are very segregated teams that are like, this person knows how to process on LifeCom. This person knows how to process on CyberLife. This person knows how to process on FAST. This person knows how to process on this system. There's individual teams that process on systems. Then there's individual teams that process certain product lines. I know when I was a processor, there were certain people that process traditional products versus universal products versus variable products.
Yep.
There's too much specificity to these different groups, so that when somebody is out suddenly, right? Out sick suddenly for a long period of time, or just leaves or whatever, you're out, 50% of that workforce on that block, right?
Yeah.
So not only are you dealing with system, you're dealing with product line, all of that specificity. So it's unscalable. Like you can't function that way, right?
Yeah.
So basically the goal needs to be that you're able to cross-train your team to be able to work across product lines and work across systems, right? And I know that's a tall order, right? Because that's a lot of cross-skilling. But there are carriers that are adapting towards cross-trained teams. I know that they're starting to kind of say, okay, well, life teams are more life, and then annuity teams are annuity, instead of saying traditional versus whole life versus, or not traditional versus universal life versus variable. You now just have a life team, right? But they still are separate. So I know that there is effort towards that. But we've been seeing that happen at Benekiva. some of our teams are kind of starting to mesh together and saying, because they're having a similar experience on the platform, regardless if they're life or annuity, they're starting to be able to just cross-train regardless, because the processing experience is the same, right? So as long as you do this correctly, you transform your process correctly, you streamline the experience, you standardize where it needs to be standardized, and you get the right digital experience for your people, you can cross-train across different platforms, across different, product lines easily. And then you help kind of cushion the blow from that retirement that's going to happen very soon, because it is 2026.
That was going to be my next question, is what kind of time scale do people have to work to? Is it a
2030?
This year all the life teams are going to be together, and next year we're going to train on a different product? Or how do you do that? Because that's a lot of information for a person to take on.
It really depends, right? I think that, it's one thing entirely. Like when I was a claims examiner, we had level 1 examiners, right? Level 1 examiners did basic beneficiaries, so individual people, funeral home assignments, but you didn't do estates, you didn't do trusts, you didn't do, collateral assignments, you didn't do anything like that. And then you got promoted to a level 2, so you were an advanced examiner, and then you could do minors, estates, trusts, things like that. But different companies function different ways, right? So that was just functional claims, right? This wasn't different systems. This wasn't different product lines or anything like that. That was just complexity, right? So it really depends on the carrier. It depends on the team and what their product offering even is, right?
Yeah. But it's something every carrier should be thinking about and planning for.
It's unfortunately, it is an inevitability that everybody is marching towards right now. And everybody needs to be thinking about it and taking action towards it today.
Yeah.
How this is, because there is no way it's not going to impact your team. You have to take action towards it today.
Yeah. That's huge.
I'm sorry to tell you, but it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in the next 4 years if it hasn't happened yet.
Better to know and plan for it than to not know.
Yep.
All right. Well, I know we're running a little long today, but this is all really good stuff. So we're going to bring it home with one last pitfall. I'm going to call this 7+, because I think this one has some extras in it. But just kind of wrapping all this up, everyday workflows. What we're talking about right now has been implementations. It's been strategy. It's been kind of more higher thinking, like higher level strategy. But talking about everyday claims workflows, what are common everyday workflows that you see carriers doing inefficiently, or things that could be made better to make everyone's claim experience and day-to-day job better?
You know what my first one's going to be? Correspondence.
Of course.
Correspondence, number one. For those of you who weren't in my first Claimversation, it was all about correspondence standardization. So I've seen carriers with dozens, and dozens is a very, very conservative, hundreds of templates that are basically slight variations of the same message. Like quite literally, sometimes it's only a word different. Different text blocks with small wording changes when it could literally be captured in the same template with logic implemented to decide when you're going to populate that particular text box. It becomes extremely hard to manage, especially from a compliance perspective when there's updates that need to be made. And instead of simplifying, it creates an extreme amount of complexity. That is the first thing when I go into a new customer, that I recommend that they do before I even take all and basically start their implementation. When I take all of the work aside and build their workflow, I say, I need you to take all of your correspondence today and I need you to start working through it to try to streamline it. Because right now, I know that you can. It's going to be a lot smoother. And then I take it and then I still make suggestions because it's never enough. But that's number one. Reporting is the second. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. These are my top 3. Reporting, there a lot of times I see a lot of the same report with almost exactly the same data, just sliced different. And a lot of duplicate versions being sent at different times of the day or in a slightly different format, like a CSV versus a PDF. Version control issues end up being a big problem here. A lot of duplication, a lot of extra time spent because configuration of reports doesn't take zero time. It does take some time to do. And it causes issue with reconciliation as well. Last thing of my top 3 is work distribution. So a lot of carriers are still managing assigning claims on spreadsheets, even though they don't have to. They still are doing it that way because they've always done it that way, and trying to rebalance their workloads that way. It's extremely time consuming. And all of these 3 things usually are workloads that are assumed by the managers or the team leads, by the way. So they're the people that are supposed to be your front lines to your team, and trying to, keep everybody going and keep the morale up. And they're trying to basically juggle all of these top 3 things. So just throwing that one out there. They're the ones trying to kind of keep everything afloat. And these are the most inefficient things that they're having to manage on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Individually, none of them seem that big of a deal, but they are like death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah. And how much more can they be effective for their teams or just not be bogged down by monotonous things if they can condense?
I know I personally had to do a work distribution report one time, or not one time, but for 4 years when I was a claims lead. And I spent an hour and a half every morning doing it.
Wow.
Color coding, making sure it was in the right order, making sure everybody's work was together, making sure that the priority was where it was, hour and a half. And that was the fastest I could get it done.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Imagine what you could have done with that 10 hours back every week.
Yep.
That's wild. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why we're talking about these pitfalls as we're coming and bringing this in for a landing of these things. They seem small, or even maybe they seem overwhelmingly big, but the difference it makes can really matter to your team, to your leaders, to your claimants. Every decision. Yeah.
Think of the growth that your managers could be working with your team and like supporting them and stuff instead of spending 10 hours working on a report, you know? Yeah.
I'm going to ask you this question. I think you're going to have the same answer that you did the last time you were on for a conversation. But my question for you is, if carriers could take away, because we covered a lot of grounds, if they could only take away one thing from the session today, what would you want it to be?
Transformation isn't about the tech. It's about the decisions you make on your process. Is that what I said last time?
What you said last time was ask why. What you just said is kind of a different way of saying that.
Yeah, definitely. That's pretty much what I'm always going to say. Yeah, I think it's the decisions you make around your process. I'm a big process nerd, but it's really important.
It matters.
Yeah. You can't just throw tech at everything and expect it to change. I work at a tech company, right? I'm a big fan of modernization and using new technology solutions to try to make things better. Like it's really, really great to get to do that for a living, but I don't want to recreate bad processes in new tech. Nope. That's like nails on a chalkboard to me. So
it defeats the purpose, and then you can't use the tech to its full capability.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Amazing. Well, Jes, thank you for joining us again. As always, very thought-provoking. If anything that we talked about today resonated with you and you'd love to discuss it or kind of dig into what it should look like for you, give us a call. Like reach out to us. We would love to dig into your processes. It's what we do every day. It's what we love to do. But thank you guys so much for joining today's Claimversation. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.